does.
Great job.
It's close. It's really close.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to NASCAR America. Hang on a second. What did they call this again?
Debrief.
Debrief?
Oh, my God. Seriously? I know you came to YouTube to see videos of cats falling out of trees and squirrels water skiing, but it's us, NASCAR America Debrief.
Right. We welcome you in, Mike Bagley and Pete Festoni. We co-host the Morning Drive on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 90, and we're so glad to be with you. Big day today in NASCAR, the Hall of Fame voting day, and we had 5 deserving individuals get voted in. Of course, the #1 go-getter and vote-getter was Tony Stewart of them all.
Yeah, now that's not a surprise, but to me, when you look at the percentage, Mike, you had 72 for Joe Gibbs, 72 for Waddell Wilson, 70 for Buddy Baker, 67 for Bobby Labonte. That's pretty high. When we've had people come in the last few years less than 50%. So those are high numbers. So that tells you that the people in that room felt pretty strongly about those 5 people.
Indeed, they did. And it's good to see a lot of drivers get those votes and those percentages. Let's go to the phones. Let's get your thoughts right now. We go to Paul in Virginia. Paul, hello. Welcome in.
Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I do have one question in regards to the voting process. Why is it only 5 that are allowed in each year?
What's funny about that, Paul, is we get people usually on our show that ask, why so many?
Yeah.
5. Like, that's too many. Why do you think that that's too little a number for you, Paul?
You were mentioning earlier in the broadcast about the people who built the sports, like the team owners, the engineers, and stuff like that I've heard of for years and years, but they're still waiting to get in.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a number that they just landed on. I mean, it wasn't any recipe. It wasn't any, let's have this or that. They just started at 5, and then, of course, the landmark award winner. I think 5 is the right number. Some argue that it's too many. Some argue that it's too few. I think for at least right now where we sit, it's just fine.
Yeah, I think it is. And I get what Paul's saying because we just talked about that on the NASCAR America Motor Mouth show with Kyle and DJ. A lot of us believe that the pioneer guys should get in, but the more this goes on and more contemporaries become eligible, to Paul's point, the less those guys maybe get recognized. So, I mean, it's a good point, but I'm good with 5, too.
I am
5's fine.
Jason in Florida. Hello, Jason.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hey, Jason.
Hey, just want to touch on this. I actually kind of agree with Kyle earlier when he was talking about the older back in the day guys getting in and stuff like that. With the current 5 that are inducted, I'm just curious, why did it take so long for Buddy Baker to actually get into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
Good question.
Great
I
question.
mean, some will say that Buddy should have gone in long before. You know, there were some pretty heavy hitters. I think a lot of this, though, Pete, involves who's in the class that you're being considered to go in with.
Absolutely.
And if there are other people, other individuals, sometimes the competition is stiff. I had a feeling last night at dinner that Buddy was going to be in. I had this feeling about Buddy Baker that this was his year. It took him 10 years, but he's finally in.
Well, it's because you ordered those butter beans. We already talked about that on our show this morning. But the thing about Buddy is, and I think, Baggy, you just nailed it, it does depend who else is on the ballot. And I think listen, I've been on the Buddy Baker plan for a while, so have you, since he's been nominated. A lot of times it depends on who he has to go up against, and you try to get that room to get that vote to where it needs to be. And I think that probably got in Buddy's way more than anything.
Amanda in Charlotte. Amanda, welcome in. Glad to have you.
Hey, guys. My question is, which driver was the biggest surprise, and then which driver would you put in that either they weren't on the ballot or you would have put on the ballot?
What do you got?
Well, I wasn't surprised by anyone, but a guy that I had on my list that didn't make it was Harry Gant. I grew up watching Harry Gant. I mean, I'm from Delaware. I used to go to Dover all the time. I used to watch Harry just blaze around Dover, and, you know, Mr. September back in the day when he would just win race after race. Long time. He was the bridesmaid, as they say, finishing runner-up. He was on my short list. He was on my list of 5 for this year. What about you?
Well, me, because I'm Mr. Old School, again, I had Marvin Panch on my list. And again, another guy that I think as this goes on, I hope he doesn't get left behind because he made a lot of contributions. He won a lot of races. And he did it in an era where it wasn't easy to win. I'm not saying it's easy now, but he did it with a lot less money and effort and time in a lot of the places that he raced. And again, I want some of these people that maybe are going to get, as every year goes on, a little bit more in the rearview mirror to be recognized. So I would have had Marvin Panch on my list today.
Next up, let's go to Ohio. Jake is here along with us. Jake, welcome in.
Hi, how you doing today?
Hey, Jake,
great.
Good.
Well, Harry Gant was the question I had. I grew up watching Harry Gant. He was and probably still will always be my favorite driver. And if he had won even a single championship, do you think he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer? And why isn't he a Hall of Famer right now?
Well, I mean, that's a good question because it's all about what goes on in the voting room. We don't know what's on their minds. And again, you don't know what's on people's minds of, okay, Harry contributed a lot to the sport, but he doesn't have a championship. But then again, neither does Mark Martin, but he's in the Hall of Fame. I think that perhaps maybe Harry went about his business quietly, and Harry didn't necessarily make a big splash about what he was doing on the racetrack. And I don't know if that's resonating now. He always went about his business very quietly, very peacefully, but very potently at the same time. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Jake brings up the point about if you get a championship, is that the automatic birth? You know, well, you brought up Mark Martin.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be. But I think in the case of Harry Gant, I agree with everything you said, but maybe that championship would have been the tipping point for some people when they got in the room and looked at the statistics of Harry Gant. There's no doubt, quiet, you know, high, wide, and handsome and all that stuff that we talk about with Harry Gant. Not a flashy guy by any means, but again, I don't have a ballot, but my 5 names had Harry Gant on the 5 today as well.
Let's head out to Missouri. Dan, welcome in. Glad to have you.
Hey, glad to be here.
Hey, man.
My question's about Larry Phillips. Half the country probably hasn't heard of him because he's basically a short track guy. But he was NASCAR short track champion 5 years in a row, and he only lost 1 race out of 100 during that time. And he'd tow out to California on an open trailer with a dirt car and win the 100-lapper at a track he'd never seen before. Then he'd overnight drive over to Stockton, another 6 hours up north, put an asphalt set up on the car and a bigger wing, and win an open comp race there at Stockton on the asphalt. And he did all the work himself. He built his own chassis. And the last race that he won, he beat Jamie McMurray by a foot after a race-long battle. And he died a few weeks after that of cancer. And I think Larry, if anybody ever watched Larry race, you would remember Larry. And I think Kyle Petty come and drove at the I-44 Speedway in Lebanon one night, and they had some stars there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you just stated the case as to why Larry should be in, and he's made an impact not only on the short tracks of America, but we were chatting earlier this morning on the Morning Drive on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio that he has actually been involved in some professional drivers' careers, actually Hall of Fame driving careers.
Yes, he's been a launching pad. Dan in Missouri wanted to ask about Larry Phillips. Shocking, because, I mean, he was a Midwestern superstar. And I thought it was cool. Did you see the video? He ran on dirt and he ran on asphalt. And to your point, not just the championships and the race wins, but he helped people get a career. The deal with for me, the deal with that is still, I believe, the top tier guys, Mike, are going to keep grassroots guys, whether right or wrong. I think that's the process right now. Guys like Larry Phillips probably a little bit more in the background.
This week of May is a magical week. We obviously have the Coca-Cola 600 coming up in the world of NASCAR. You got the IndyCar Gentry at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Indy 500. But today, this Wednesday, is a very special day when we find out who the next 5 will be to be enshrined into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. What do you think about today? Give me some final thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think what we said at the beginning of the day pretty much held true. We knew for sure, for the most part, Tony Stewart was going to get in, and he did with 88% of the vote. But after that, I thought it was more wide open this year than maybe most years. And I think the list of people that are in, all worthy, but there are some names there that maybe you didn't have, that I didn't have, maybe you didn't have out there at home. And I thought that was sort of the flavor of this year's Hall of Fame class. Can't wait for all the speeches next, February, when everybody gets inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
End of January, beginning of February. Everybody will reconvene here in Uptown Charlotte, and that's when the 5 that were announced today will be enshrined as the 10th class into the NASCAR Hall of Fame, the 2020 class, as it were. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here with us. For Pete Pistone, I'm Mike Bagley. This has been the NASCAR America Debrief. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.